This man found out his sister was his biological mother and had the best reaction possible. Growing up as the oldest child came with a lot of responsibility. I had to set the right examples for my younger brother and sister, and oftentimes I failed. I was a problem child, but the older I got, the more responsible I became, and they followed my lead. Being the oldest sibling comes with huge burdens of being responsible and looking after younger siblings and making sure they are protected. And I'm sure for the people reading who have older siblings, it probably annoyed them as well, with an older sibling being a bit overprotective. But it's for the best and is rooted in love, love that might run even deeper than they know. Watch ahead about how this older sister's love ran deep, deeper than her younger brother realized and ever could have dreamed. Being the only child is something that has a huge upside. You get all of the adoration of your parents exclusively, don't have to compete with the standards of your older siblings, and you will spend your whole life never knowing what it's like to share a bedroom with anybody. But it has downsides as well. When you are at home and away from other kids, you can get lonely. Having nobody to play with or talk to can't be the most fun thing in the world. Yeah, you might have all the toys ever, but what good is a seesaw? Siblings are the best. You have company at all times, and there is never really a dull moment. You get to have somebody in the house at all times that you can lean on and share some of the best moments with. Eventually, you even start to appreciate the fights, and believe me, you will be fighting a lot. But that's their jobs. They can cause the biggest headaches, but also you still want what's best for them and want to keep them out of harm's way. They're annoying, but they're your little annoying people. That's the ultimate role of an older sibling. You have to look after the younger siblings and make sure that they have everything that they need. You're an extension of your parents. That means sometimes you have to be the bad guy, but you're doing it all out of love, whether they understand it or not. Take this from somebody who is an older sibling. My younger siblings annoyed me to no end daily. They were simultaneously the best and worst things I had in my life, but I wouldn't trade them for the world. Being the older sibling also can annoy younger siblings, because a certain level of overprotectiveness can come with the role. And sometimes the younger sibling just wants to be able to breathe and make their own decisions, but this is all done out of love. But what if that overprotectiveness was for another reason? What if it was because this wasn't just your older sibling, but something a little bit more? Scratch that, something a lot more. What if your sibling was actually your parent? I know this sounds weird and far-fetched, but trust me, it's very possible. I'm about to take you through a story of this exact scenario happening. Pete has an older sister named Rose, and they both were raised together with a foster family. Rose has been by Pete's side through everything and always took care of him, and he decided to share his story on Reddit about how it all came about. Pete believed everything was normal. He grew up in a warm and loving environment and never felt the need to question anything. Everything seemed so normal to him, and rightfully so. He was in the care of a great adoptive family, and his sister was by his side through it all. He was even told the story of his parents. Pete was told the story of how he and his sister had two drug addict parents who never took care of them. They never bothered feeding them and used to leave them at a junkie friend's house for days to go out partying. He was even led to believe he was lucky to be here. When his mom was pregnant with him, she smoked and got drunk, which meant Pete was pretty lucky to be here and be perfectly healthy. In some ways, Pete's entire life is a miracle. His sister had to take on the role of mother. Pete's older sister had to do all of the heavy lifting, taking care of him once their parents were out of the picture. She filled the role admirably, all things considered. She was just a child herself at the time, and somehow they made it out of those dire circumstances. When he was 2 months old, that was the last time he saw his parents. They got help from an old couple, which turned out to be their adoptive family, and from that point forward, Pete and Rose had a pretty stable life. After a few months of not being able to contact their parents, the old couple began the lengthy process of adopting Rose and Pete. Today, Pete is 19, and he still lives with the same adoptive family. Rose is 34 years old, and she lives about 20 minutes away, so she is still pretty much within arm's reach. Pete still sees Rose 3 to 4 times a week, and they maintain a close relationship after all they've been through. A couple of months ago, Pete took a DNA test. One of his friends suggested to him since he didn't really know much about his heritage or parents. Rose never told him much, so he went out to inquire on his own. Naturally, he was curious, but there was no way he could have prepared for what he was about to find out. He found out he had an aunt in the system, and she agreed to meet up with Pete in person. But this was all happening without Rose having any knowledge of what was going on. He immediately saw similarities between them. Pete and his aunt had the same eye color and same hair color. Pete began to ask her some questions just to gather more information, and then layers began to get peeled back. That's right about when the story gets really crazy. Pete's aunt told him about her sister. She told him that when she was 13, her 14-year-old sister got pregnant while being drunk with her junkie boyfriend, and a month after giving birth, she ran away with the baby after some pretty intensive fights with their parents. The family looked for her after she ran away. They never found her and stopped looking after about a year and a half. At that point, they gave up and lost hope on finding her, hoping that she was safe and wishing the best for her. Pete began thinking. He started connecting the dots and asked to see a picture of his aunt's sister. They went to her parents' house where the mother wasn't home and the father had passed away 3 years ago. Pete immediately knew. When he saw the picture, he instantly knew. This was Rose, 100%. Imagine living with your sister for 19 years and not knowing about your parents, only to find out you have been with your mom the whole time. His life was a lie. Rose was his mom, they were never abandoned, they didn't have junkie parents, and she fabricated the entire thing to him and their adoptive family. Rose honestly needs to write fantasy novels. Pete thanked his aunt. Pete gave her a hug and told her that it was a lot for him to handle at that moment. He asked her to keep it as their secret for the time being. Pete stayed at his best friend's house for a week. Pete told his best friend everything, and that's where he had been staying for a week. He told his parents and sister that's where he was staying because he had a new video game. Really, he was just buying time. Pete wanted time to himself. He couldn't even face Rose, and who could blame him? When you find out that your mom has been in your life since birth but lying to you and saying she is your sister, you would question everything as well. Where was his dad? Did his adoptive parents know? Were they in on it? There was a lot to figure out. He eventually talked to Rose. After she broke down at the news being broken to her that Pete knew the truth, Rose came forward and explained everything to him. There was no need in keeping any more secrets. He threw her a late baby shower. Pete brought a picnic basket with an "It's a Boy" sign for a belated baby shower for Rose. He also brought an assortment of other snacks to celebrate the occasion with her. He turned an uncomfortable situation into a positive one and a moment of celebration. Rose reveals all. Eventually, Rose explained the whole story. According to her, she got drunk and slept with a junkie friend at some point, and he bailed before Pete was born. Her parents weren't supportive of her decision to keep the baby, so she ran away. When they were discovered at a mall a few towns away, Rose made up the whole story, and the family that found him at the mall eventually adopted them. They never knew the truth. Rose also said Pete's dad had died in prison a few years back.